so let me give you just a quick overview on what we're doing. They're going to set out a few chairs, but I'll just kind of get you up to speed on what we're trying to accomplish. So Monday nights, we've changed it around a little bit. We used to do what we were calling 242. We'd eat together and commune together and do what really Acts 2:42 was all about. And you heard that yesterday if you were here, fellowshipping together and praying together and studying the Apostles' Doctrine together and eating together and sharing communion together. And we did that for a season, but it's fun to change things up sometimes. And it seemed like a lot of the questions that we were continuing to get, because often on Monday nights I would take questions. I'd have people reach out ahead of time and ask me, what questions they had and wanted answers to. And often they were philosophical or scientific in nature. And so we thought we would change it up a little bit, at least through the end of the year, and try something different. And come and just have some music at 6, and then at 7 just teach until 8 o'clock on various topics that have to do with belief and faith, and open the door where skeptics are welcome. And so really there's two primary goals of this. One would be for believers to get foundational level knowledge so that they will understand better their own faith. A lot of Christians that I've met over the years, especially Christians that grew up in the faith, just out of curiosity, how many in here grew up in faith? Okay, how many of you did not? Okay, so that's a fair number. And so for those of you that grew up in faith, not necessarily you guys, but one of the things I hear a lot here is that they never had the foundation of why they believed. It was just always assumed that this is what we do, this is what we believe, and sometimes then when confronted with questions about their faith, they have a hard time answering why. Like, why are you a Christian? Tell me. What's the evidence that you have that Jesus is real? Give me evidence for why you think and believe that He died on a cross and that He rose again. Give me evidence why you believe that there is a God in the first place. And often, Christians that grow up in the faith don't have those answers. Now, truth is, even people that become faithful later in life often don't have the questions answered either. It just depends on how you come to faith. Some people come to faith from a very intellectual perspective, and they looked at evidence and it was presented well to them and it made sense, and they said, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. Others, it may have been an emotional thing. You go to a conference or a revival and your heart is tugged on and you go, yes, this is what I need and I want this and I accept this. And then once again, the faith comes under scrutiny, and often people just don't have the ability to define why they believe. So for a lot of people, what happens in those moments is they give up on their faith. And they begin to say, well, maybe this is not reasonable to believe the things that I believe. I've never had anyone explain it. On Friday night, for instance, we open up on Friday nights just for music and nothing structured. We just kind of hang out, play games or whatever. I love Friday nights. And I was sitting here and talking to a newer Renew person, and he basically said that he had grown up with a faith system, but as he got into college, the questions began to come, and professors began to ask harder questions, and had kind of given up on faith because he would go to a pastor and say, well, why is it that we believe this? And often the pastor's response was, well, you just have to have faith. And he would never give a reasonable response to why. And so he sort of just drifted away because he assumed that faith was not reasonable. It was something that he believed in some way, but until he came here to begin exploring some of these deeper questions, he hadn't really understood why he believed what he believed. And so a large portion of what we're trying to do is accomplish that for you. I would love to see, 40 or 50 more teenagers here too, because the things you guys are going to get confronted with as you get into high school and get into college are going to be some of the people I'm going to talk about tonight. They're going to say that faith is unreasonable, and they will try to convince you that faith is unreasonable. And so what I want to do is give you tools that will show you the exact opposite. That in fact, faith is the most reasonable thing. It is the most reasonable argument. The lack of faith takes more faith. The lack of belief takes more faith than it does to believe that there's a creator God. And so we're going to talk through some of those things on Monday nights from time to time. But that's part of it. It's to give you foundational level things so that you can answer a question of why you believe when that comes up. And then for people that don't believe, and I hope we have some, I hope we have skeptics that will come on these nights, and it might be entertaining and interesting if we have some that want to argue a point, and that'll be okay, and we'll enjoy that. And if it happens, I will enjoy it for sure. Just sit back and be quiet, and it'll be all right. We'll be okay. And but it'll be fun. But it's not just to win an argument. It is to show people that that faith is reasonable. That faith is something you really can have. That belief is something that is believable, and all those things. And so we want to do both of those things on Monday nights. So Monday night is much less of a church service, much more of an opportunity for us to dig deep on different topics. And I'm going to try to make Monday nights stand alone. In other words, not like part one, part two. Although, even today, as I kind of looked through some of the things that I wanted to talk about, and I made some notes, I was on page 3 and went, well, 3 pages of handwritten notes for me is about an hour and 20 minutes. So I'm probably not going to get as far as I want to go. I had 10 different kinds of atheism I want to talk through and help you understand where different people are coming from and how to ask intelligent questions. Because ultimately, if you're dealing with an atheist, how you answer questions and how you interact is ultimately most important. So we're going to jump in there. I'm going to go ahead and pray, and part of what I'm going to say on ongoing Friday nights is if we have skeptics here and they don't like it that we're going to pray, the answer is too bad. This is a church, and I am a pastor, so I choose to pray anyway, and I can if I want to. There you go. It's my party, and I'll pray if I want to. Sorry. I'm singing it, aren't you? All right, let's pray. God, thanks for giving us a night together to just talk and enjoy this moment, and I pray that you open up our minds so we'll understand and implant things in us that will last a lifetime. Give us opportunities to share these things and good news with people so that the lost will be saved, and so that those that are saved will grow and mature and be equipped to be ready to give a defense for the hope that is within them. And so that's what we pray for tonight. We praise you for this night, a beautiful night. We can come and do it. In Jesus' name, amen. And so let's define atheism then. Really the term for this class that we're going to do tonight is the 10 different kinds of atheists. And how do we begin to understand where they're coming from? And how do we begin to formulate a conversation? Not necessarily an argument, although arguments can come out of conversations, would you agree? But at least how can you enter into a conversation? Now I think what would be fun at some point, maybe we'll do this here in a few weeks. You tell me if you think this would be fun or not. What I want to teach on for a while is I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, basically, is the concept. And so what I'm going to talk about for a couple of weeks are the 10 different kinds of atheists. And then we're going to talk about reasonableness of faith and how we overcome the atheist objection. And then maybe it would be fun for one night to actually have some mock discussions and kind of do it and play off of each other. And how would if someone were to say, well, I hate it that they're, in God we trust is on our money. That's stupid. God's not real. We should never do it. How would you respond? And kind of role play it out and play some of those things out. Because is it possible you would actually hear someone say that? Well, of course it is. And so let's make sure we define atheism to begin with. And so atheism says there is no God. That's basically the major tenet of atheism. It's different than agnosticism. And agnostic says, which is A-G-N-O-S-T-I-C. And agnostic says, I don't know if there's a God. Or they'll say, we can't know if there's a God. A lot of people out there would say we can't know if there's an objective truth or not. And so because we can't know, then I just won't worry about it. And so most agnostics come from the perspective of you can't know whether there's a God or not, or there's not enough evidence to know or not. And ultimately, most agnostics would say, I don't care. I'm apathetic toward it. It doesn't matter. If you want to believe in God, that's great. I might today, I might not tomorrow, or whatever. An atheist, on the other hand, generally will say, no, there is no God. Now, we could talk about either one, how to approach both, agnostics and atheists. But atheists are a totally different group than an agnostic. And honestly, I'll tell you, I think agnostics are harder to deal with sometimes than atheists. I think that surprises people when I say that. But an agnostic generally says, I just don't care. They're just totally apathetic. And so it's hard to have an intelligent conversation with an agnostic who says, I just don't care. It just doesn't matter. If you want to believe it, great. And I'm all for it. Believe it. But I don't think I can get there. And maybe today I'll believe and tomorrow I won't, but it doesn't matter, But an atheist, they're usually very resolute and they have a reason why they don't believe. And these days, you hear them also saying things like, it's not just that there's no God, but that there's no meaning. This is the new atheism that's really come in the last several decades, especially. That there's just absolutely no meaning. Everything is useless. Religion is harmful. This is usually one of the major tenets of atheism, that religion is harmful, that it's not just apathy, it's absolutely harmful. And so this is part of why you see atheists trying to make the argument that faith is that a religion is illogical and unreasonable and harmful, and you should run away from it. And this is partly why we see so much anger in our culture these days, and saying things like, let's get rid of "In God We Trust" and let's not have Christmas decorations and those kinds of things, which is a pretty new development in culture. Would you agree? At least in our country. And it's just because they've gone further from there is no God to not only is there no God, but God is harmful. The idea of God existing is harmful and hurting our society. And so where we start then is with 1 Peter 3:15. So let me just read this to you very quickly. And again, if we have non-believers in the room and you don't like it that we're going to talk about Scripture, again, too bad. It's a church, so I'm going to do it from time to time. But 1 Peter 3:15 says this, "But sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence." So part of what this is saying is, it's saying be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you about the hope that you have in you. And so there's lots there. I could probably preach for 30 minutes just on that one line. Part of it is, that means you have to have hope in your life for people to notice. This is part of what we talked about yesterday in the message about being attractional, incarnational, missional kind of thing. If you missed yesterday, we'll have it up on YouTube in the next couple days. You should watch it and get caught up there, because this series is not very long and it was important stuff. But I think that 3:15 passage says a lot. And one of the things is that if you have Christ in your heart, you should have hope in your life, so much so that people will ask you, why are you different? If you don't, then there's a different thing that we've got to work on. But if there's no hope in you and people don't see hope in your life, then there's a challenge there. But realistically then is when people do ask you to have hope, why you have hope in your life, then you need to be ready to give a defense. That means it needs to be different than, well, let me give you my pastor's phone number. He'll answer it for you. That's great and all, but the bigger we get, the less likely that's going to be possible for me to pull that off all the time. It happens a lot now. And so really the best thing is to train you how to give a defense, how you can explain things. When people say, why are you so happy all the time? Let's just start there just for a moment. I know we're getting to atheism, but if someone were to accuse you of being full of hope and say, why do you always have hope? Everything looks a mess. Why do you have hope in your life? What would you say?
Because God's in control.
Because God's in control? Good. What else?
Faith.
What?
Faith.
Faith? Good. What else?
Belief.
I believe. Good. So here's the thing though, it's a harder question than we even want to admit, right? I mean, maybe you're scared to answer the question in front of, 30 or 40 people, but really it is a question that throws a lot of people off if they've never been confronted with it. And so having a reasonable faith and being able to explain it and articulate it when people ask is really important. And so what we want to talk then about are these atheists and how we interact with them with gentleness and reverence. And that's the other part. Personally, that's the hardest thing for me out of 1 Peter 3:15. Gentleness and reverence. What does reverence mean? Someone tell me. If I were going to interact with you in a reverent way, what would that mean?
Respecting someone as a person, on person to person.
Yeah.
We're going to discuss this like human beings.
Right. We're going to be respectful. We're going to have an intelligent conversation. Good. What else? I think reverent could also mean a God-honoring way. And so I'm going to have an interaction with them in a gentle and God-honoring, relational, respectful way. That's hard for me sometimes. It is. I'm just going to tell the truth. When I get on an airplane or something with some angry atheists that F-bombs God, I want to punch them in the throat with my words, and I want to beat them up, and like come to the defense and be intense. And sometimes that intensity can push people away even further. And so with gentleness and respect and reverence is hard, but it is what we're called to do. Okay? All right, so how do we deal with this then? How do we understand the atheists and how do we talk about them? So I think what we're going to try and do is I'm going to try and get through 5 of these. We'll see how it works. May not get that far at all. But let me say to you one other thing before we get into the first one, and that is when you begin to interact with an atheist or an agnostic or even just someone that just doesn't believe like you believe, how you say what you say is just as important as what you say. And I should have said that earlier. What you say is important, but how you say it is another thing. If you say it with arrogance, you will portray God a certain way and you lose your witness in that. If you do it with just pride or anger or defensiveness, it does mess it up. How we say things is just as important and maybe even more important than what we say. So you may not always have an exact answer, but we'll talk about how we deal with those kinds of things as we go through it. All right, so 10 kinds of atheists. I think what will surprise you, first of all, did it surprise anyone that I said there are 10 different kinds of atheists? Did that surprise anybody? Probably most people would go, well, there's just an atheist. Someone says there's no God. The real question is, how did they become an atheist? Now, there's probably more than 10 ways, but there are 10 categories, I would say, that we could group them into. And based on where they're coming from and what caused the atheism, that will change the way that we interact with them. Okay? So give me one example, for instance, so I can make my point. Give me one example of how someone might have come to the decision to be an atheist. Yeah?
The death of a loved one.
Death of a loved one. Okay? What would be another reason that would be very opposite of that someone might conclude that now they're an atheist?
Skepticism of the church.
Skepticism of the church. Or skepticism because of science, or things like that, which are very different reasonings than they have death of a loved one. Does everybody see that? So that's what I'm talking about when we start talking about different kinds of atheists. But if I'm talking to an atheist that is really saying there is no God because my mom died, that's a totally different conversation than with someone that says, I'm an atheist and I don't believe there's a God because science has disproven it. Make sense? So how I interact with them and how I begin to understand where they're coming from and meet people where they are is totally opposite in those two situations. So part of what we have to do is be good diagnosticians. Like if you were to go to the doctor, most of the time you don't go to the doctor and go, I hurt. And the doctor goes, okay, here's your prescription. Now, it might be that easy with some doctors, but it shouldn't be. And so they just write you a prescription. A good doctor would do what? I hurt. What would they say? Where? How long? Does it hurt when I do this or when I do this? Does it hurt when I do that or this? Those kinds of things. Or does it? No, that kind of thing. It depends. What they're trying to do is get to the heart of what the issue is. We have to do the same thing. And so a lot of the questions as I go through this with you and show you how to interact, a lot of it has to do with being a diagnostician and asking questions about why are you there? How'd you get there? What changed? Have you ever believed? Do you want to believe? And those kinds of questions, okay? All right, so let's start with this. The angry atheist, number one. I think the angry atheist is probably one of the most common atheists that are out there. They're angry for different reasons, and their unbelief is fueled by negative emotions. They just have a negative view of God for various reasons. They're angry, and they're often very outwardly hating God, as opposed to just saying there's no God. How many of you have seen the movie God's Not Dead? Everybody see that? Okay. And so, would you say that the professor, for those of you that have seen that movie, was that professor an angry atheist? Yes. Because when it came down to it, with the right prompting and the right questions, he admitted that there was a God, didn't he? He just hated it. And so often an angry atheist goes there. They often, they will say they don't believe because they really, in essence, hate God so badly. Or they hate where they are, or they hate a circumstance so bad that they just hate everything that is divine or looks divine. And that means if you represent something that's divine, they will hate you too. This is an angry atheist. And so it often, now in my experience with angry atheists, and I've had plenty of interesting experiences with angry atheists, I think a lot of them use shock value to their benefit. And they will try to shock the good little Christian guy or the good little Christian gal by their hatred toward God. And will use obscenities and profanity when it relates to God. This is a big sign for you that you're dealing with an angry atheist. And so, how do you deal with that kind of thing? Well, one of the best ways to deal with it, for instance, if you had an angry atheist and you interact with them and they're yelling profanities and hatred toward a God, probably your best bet is just to sit there and listen to them. And then at the end go, are you ready to talk now? Did you get that out of your system? I mean, are we good? Can we talk? Now, I've had people say that like to me and as a pastor and wait for the response of, how dare you say those things? And you certainly could respond that way, and inside you want to. If you love God, for someone to take His name in vain that way and curse Him, it's hard not to want to fight. Sometimes the best way to disarm them, though, is to not let them break you. Because ultimately, I think that's what a lot of them do. As a defense mechanism for themselves, they have to spew out such venom and hatred toward God that will scare you off so they don't have to be confronted by you. And so sometimes one of the best things to say to someone who has spouted off all these terrible things about God is to say, I've heard all those words before. So, let's move on. And it's usually very disarming. I think I've told this story before. We had a guy that lived across the street from us in Kansas City, and he always loved to take me out to lunch, and he would come over and beg me to go out to lunch with him. And so he'd always buy, and so this old craggly guy, and he would curse like, you just cannot believe. Everything out loud in front of the waiters and the waitresses. And then he would say, "This is my pastor." Just on and on and on. And I would just smile and go, yep. And of course, he never one time ever came in the doors of our church in Kansas City. But to him, I was his pastor. And I think a lot of it was shock value. And every now and then he'd catch himself and go, I shouldn't say it in front of you. And did I hurt your feelings? And I'd say, well, I've heard it before, Barry. I've heard it from you a lot. So let's, what do we want to talk about today? Let's just move on, let's get there. But angry atheists often love the shock value. Often, an angry atheist does not care about evidence or proof. One of the standard places that most of us would go talking to an atheist is we want to talk about proof. Let me prove to you why God exists. Let me prove to you why God is real. They don't care. They don't care about the evidence at all. Because they've already made up their mind. They're already angry. They hate God. There's nothing that you could say that would overcome that feeling. And so here's what usually changes the heart and the mind, at least beginning, changing the mindset and changing the anger of an angry atheist to neutrality, to a neutral position, is kindness. It's kindness. Honestly, I have never found a lot of success in debating an angry atheist. They have their mind made up. They're angry at God. They hate God. They hate you if you represent God. And sometimes just being kind to them is the very thing that will break down the barrier. Because they're used to getting their way by pushing their anger around, and it usually pushes people off in a way, especially Christian people. And if you can hang in there and show kindness and love, it will often build a friendship, and it shows some respect that gives you an opportunity to have a conversation. Because ultimately, that's really where you want to go, is just to have a conversation. Now, let me tell you, if you're dealing with an angry atheist, don't get hung up on statistics. I've not had very much success at all in my life in talking to angry atheists. Very little. I have, over the years, had lots of friends that were angry atheists. They knew who I was. They knew where I was. They didn't care a bit about evidence or any of that stuff because they had their mind made up. But the friendship and that kind of thing, I hope, over time, will be enough to catch their attention and move them forward. But here's what you got to listen. Hang on, I'll take the question in a second. You're not called to statistics. It's not your responsibility to change them. It is your responsibility to give a reason for the hope that is in you. And so it's obedience, not statistics. Please hear that. For those that really love evangelism and love being in the trenches and talking to people who are antagonistic to faith, you need to hear it, and it's really important, is that you're called to obedience, not statistics. God is the one that convicts hearts, and He's the one that will do it. We plant seeds, we water those seeds, and we hope God gives the increase and that things will change over time. And so, one of the best questions you can ask an angry atheist is this. Once you get past the immediate anger and the frustration as people throw it out to you, one of the best questions you can ask is simply, what made you decide to be an atheist? What made you decide? Now, you might get different answers there. They may say, well, I didn't decide, it decided for me. I've heard that kind of thing from people, because usually they're angry because they've been hurt in some way. They feel like, God let them down in some way, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But what made you decide there was no God? I want to hear your story. Now, when you do that, be prepared to hear the story. And you won't like the story. I mean, the stories you'll hear will shock you. They will hurt you. They will be all kinds of things that may be very personal to you even. Because depending on where they're coming from, and this borders into some of the other kinds of atheists we'll talk about, but a lot of them may have made a decision against God because of an experience at church or because of Christians. And because of that example, they say, there is no God. If He exists, I hate Him. I don't want Him. He's dead to me, away. That kind of thing. And it's hard to hear it and not come to the defense. Because if you love God, you want to defend Him. But so much of what you have to do is give restraint and let them tell their story. It'll be hard to hear. But it's the right question to ask for an angry atheist. Once they calm down and get past all the profanity about it, it is, so why are you an atheist? What happened that made you decide to be an atheist? Here's what I can almost guarantee you. Most atheists have never, ever, ever had a Christian ask them why. Most have never asked. Most Christians don't care, to be honest. They write them off most of the time. Atheists, they'll just write off and go, well, they can just do their own thing, especially with that profanity and the anger that comes out. Most Christians just don't want anything to do with them. And I'm telling you, if Christians would invest some time and breathe deep and not do this when people say things, which is one of the most beneficial things I learned in seminary, was to not do this when people say things to you. It's an important lesson. Think about what your face looks like, and get the terror out of it. And just ask them, tell me why. I want to hear your story. I want to hear your story. And it'll make a dramatic impact, just caring enough that you want to hear why. My suggestion for you is if they will tell you, and they will tell you the story, if you have shown them kindness and some respect, they'll tell you the story. Don't try to have all the answers. Understand that there's not always easy answers. The relationship is probably your best thing. And so to set up another time to get together and talk would be fair. And to let it have some time before you ask permission to engage with them further. Everybody with me on that? Okay, so I'm done with angry atheists for now. Any questions about angry atheists specifically?
I had a question. If you hang around somebody and of course it's different, like if you're not emotionally involved with them.
Yeah.
If you are, then they wait for you to slip up, even though you go to church. Because we're not perfect. I mean,
right.
I've been struggling really hard.
Yeah.
And that just shows them, it gives them more ammunition not to come or believe.
Well, it's true. I mean, many of them will look at, and it's not always an angry atheist. Again, a lot of times atheists make an intellectual argument for why they don't believe in God, but a lot of times it's emotional. Out of an emotional crisis, they've decided that this is the case. And depending on who you're talking to and how close they are to you, many of them will look for reasons how to justify their own atheism in you. And it is important that we present the right life to them. But of course, you're not going to be perfect. But they are watching. People are watching. All right.
I've also heard that people have said this to my husband, and they'll say, "Well, this guy doesn't do anything wrong. He's blah blah blah. He's takes a nice picture." But then they'll turn and say, "Well, people go to church and they're having affairs or doing that. So why would I go to church when the rest of the world is acting?"
Right. Well, I'll address this real quick, and then I need to move on so we'll get through these. But it is true. One of the things I said yesterday in the message, in being attractional and incarnational and those kinds of things, is that people do look at us and make decisions on who God is based on our life. And is it fair? Probably not. But is it reality? Yes. And so how do we overcome some of that? That's part of what we need to talk about. But the truth is, people are looking for a reason not to believe. And they do look at the Christian world and say, see, your God must be like this because you people are like this. And here's the truth. Some of you may not like what I'm about to say. The truth is, Christianity does a terrible job of representing God most of the time. It's just true. And I'm saying Christianity in general, but Christianity does a terrible job of representing God. A lot of churches do a terrible job of representing God. Read the book of Revelation sometime. See what God thinks about that stuff. It's a sad and scary thing. It really is. For us, we want to be, from a Revelation perspective, we want to be a Philadelphia church. And you can go read it, and read it in Revelation. See what that looks like. We don't want to leave our first love behind. We want to be a church of love that represents God well. Because there's a time coming where churches will be judged, and that's going to be a scary thing. So it is a true statement. It is. And again, you may not like it, but it's true. And part of that may be because I didn't grow up in a normal church environment that I think that way. But I think our society takes it too far. And even Christianity sometimes, what they really decide to do is throw away the church. We don't want to throw away the church. The church is exactly what God intended. God loves the church. Christ died for the church. Christ is the head of the church. We don't need to throw the church away. And a lot of churches try to throw the church away and say, modern church sucks in every way. And it's not true. What we have to do is get back to what it is that God intended for the church and live that life out, as opposed to what modern society has tried to make the church. And that's just part of it. All right, number 2 is my favorite one, is a scientific atheist. I promise not to spend all night here, but I could because it's fun. But scientific atheist, here's basically the argument of a scientific atheist. Science and God are not compatible. That's the argument. They'll basically say that if you have a belief in God, that means you have faith. And if you have faith, that means you are believing in something that you cannot see. Therefore, you are ignorant, stupid, a simpleton, and they will say all sorts of other nice words to you if you don't think like they think. This has always been the secret shtick of scientists, especially atheistic scientists. They use big words that no one else knows, and then when you can't answer them because you have no idea what they just said, they use that as an example why you're stupid and incompatible with a faith system. It is a very typical, especially in debate scenarios, they'll use big words that no other human ever uses to explain why you're stupid and then laugh at you because you don't know what they're saying. But if this were a philosophy class, I would explain why they do it. But they just do that kind of stuff. And so really what they will say, a scientific atheist will say, science is based on physical evidence that you can see. And so they will only believe in what they can see. Now, there are some problems with that theory. Like what? Is it fair to say we will only believe in the things that we can see? Is that reasonable? Might sound reasonable, but how would you just prove them immediately? Okay, electricity. Okay, breathing, there's air, there's wind, those kinds of things. That's a traditional argument. My favorite one is, let's talk about atoms. What, in a scanning electron microscope, how deep can you see into an atom? Anybody know? What is an atom composed of? One of our biology or physical science students. What is an atom composed of? Protons, electrons, and neutrons. Can we see the protons and neutrons with a scanning electron microscope? No. Why? Because the electron cloud. There's a cloud that, as the electrons move in their orbitals, which is all around the atom, it creates a cloud, and we can't see past it. The idea of protons and neutrons are completely theoretical. We've never seen them. We can't see them. Now, we can see it based upon the evidence of what happens when you split atoms and things like that, and the energy that's released, and thus, things that we've learned about warfare and all that stuff. But ultimately, you can't see past the electron cloud with a scanning electron microscope. Yet we believe that there's protons and neutrons based on how they behave. Everybody with me? So it's not based on the evidence of sight, even though a scientific atheist would tell you it's only what you can see and observe and touch and feel, but there are a million things that you cannot see and touch and feel in the scientific world that they are discrediting themselves. Their assumption is you're too stupid to be able to tell them that there are a lot of things in science that they can't see. They make that assumption. It's not true. But they make the assumption that that's the case, and so their entire philosophy is flawed because their main argument of we'll only believe what we can see and faith is not seeable. Well, the reality is most of what they believe in many different areas of science is absolutely faith. Absolutely faith. And so the scientific method then becomes their God. The scientific method becomes the religion. In a sense, it becomes the standard by which we determine what is real and what is not real. And so the scientific method is basically just a process, and you'll see different pieces of how a scientific method works, and I'm not going to go into great detail, but they basically say the scientific method is the answer for everything. And so in a scientific method, you have a problem, you observe something with that, and then you collect evidence, you collect data about this thing, you form a hypothesis, which is, this is what we believe to be true, and then you experiment and test it, and then you draw your conclusions. And if your conclusion fits your hypothesis, then you're done. But if your conclusion doesn't fit your hypothesis, there's a problem. Well, the problem with the scientific method for much of the scientific community is we cannot observe it and we can't experiment on it. And so, although this is their religion, they have faith there. What's a primary example of something in the science world that scientists believe beyond a shadow of a doubt, but they can't use the scientific method, even though that's their religion, they can't use the scientific method to prove that it's true.
Big Bang Theory.
The Big Bang Theory would be one. You can't observe it, and you can't experiment on it, because it would have been something in the past. And so because you can't observe it and experiment, you have thrown out two of the largest components of the scientific method that make it impossible to say this is absolutely true, absolutely. It is, and so that's the problem with the scientific atheism. So now here's what's funny, an example for you. There's this philosophy called directed panspermia. Anybody ever heard that phrase? Directed panspermia. Here's basically what it means. Scientists have realized there is absolutely no way, shape, or form that life could originate spontaneously by chance in Darwin's warm pond. They know it's not true. They know it's not possible. They've disproven it 100 years ago, over and over and over again. Life does not come from non-life. And so, about the best they can do is either hold to that old philosophy that has been disproven over and over and over again scientifically, or they have a directed panspermia idea, which means life originated on some other planet, and they brought life here and implanted it here, and then life happened from here. This is a real scientific theory. I meant to bring my textbook. If you were here last week, I brought my Holt Reinhardt Winston textbook, Visualizing Life. On the primary chapter on evolution, here's what it says. It says, basically it said, some scientists believe that aliens implanted life on the planet, directed panspermia. Some people believe that life arose from a creator. Most all scientists believe in evolution. It really says it that way. I wish I hadn't forgotten it. I'll try and bring it next week, and you can look at it yourself and go, wow, that's crazy. But listen to what they say. Some scientists believe in directed panspermia. Life originated somewhere else on accident, and it came here, because we have no hope of proving it that way, so it must have happened that way. Some people think that a creator created. They don't even give credibility to creation scientists, which there are thousands of, that have far, far, far more education than me. And then most scientists believe in evolution. It's just funny. And so what's so funny about this scientific atheism is they can... Now, let me ask you this. Is there a faith component involved in a directed panspermia model?
Oh, yeah.
Lots. There's no evidence for it whatsoever, but we certainly believe it because we don't have anything else to believe. And so this is where they go with that. You know, and Richard Dawkins, he's one of the primary crazy people, and he is crazy. I'll say that on camera. But if science doesn't prove it, I won't believe it, is what Richard Dawkins says. And you have a whole bunch of people that think that way. And the problem is that they only pick and choose what science and evidence they want to look at. And so if they only pick the things that will lead to their conclusion, they will always draw the conclusion of an atheistic evolutionary process. And so how do we interact with them? What are the questions that we would ask? Well, one of the best questions, I think, for a scientific atheist is, what would it take for you to believe that there's a creator? What would it take? What would you have to see? So many of them are based on evidence. I want evidence, I want evidence, I want evidence. Fine. What evidence would you need in order to believe? In order to see that there's a God, just tell me, what evidence would you need to see? Now, can you see why this is a totally different question than our angry atheist? Everybody with me? The angry atheist doesn't care about evidence. They're just angry because God didn't do something they wanted him to do. With this one, it is a scientific atheist, an intellectual argument. And so the question is, what would it take to believe? What would change your mind would be another way to say that. And if they say, there's absolutely nothing that would change my mind, is that intellectually dishonest? Yes. So one of the questions that I've asked it here on Monday nights before, but I'll ask it again, and that is, Is it possible to change a scientific law or to have a scientific law stop being a scientific law? The answer is yes. If new evidence presents itself that is contrary to the evidence that led them to say this is a scientific law, the law can stop being a scientific law and go to theory again. And so part of what the atheist is saying, if you were to say, what evidence would you need to see? If they said, there is absolutely no evidence that would ever convince me, the answer would be, well, isn't that intellectually dishonest? I mean, wouldn't you want to explore whatever it is if there was something? So what would it take? What would you have to see? And if you push on that enough, they'll usually give you an answer. I would have to have this, that, and whatever happen. And usually it's very scientific-minded. I have to see this and that, whatever. But it's a good place to start. All right, number 3, the injured atheist. Injured atheist. I think is different than an angry atheist. An injured atheist is really just the result of an emotional hurt. This is someone that feels like God let them down, that God did not come through for them. And I will tell you, there are lots of ex-pastors who are injured atheists these days. A lot of times pastors will get in their mind that because we serve for God all the time, we're in a protected class and nothing bad should happen to us. Truly, it is the opposite. When you serve in ministry, you have a target on your back and the devil hates you and will do everything he can to kick you in the teeth. And so it should not surprise us when bad things happen. We live in a fallen world. There really is no such thing as a protected class. You deal with stuff every day. I deal with stuff every day. And that's just reality. To pretend like none of us have war going on in our lives is ridiculous. We all do. We all have that. But yet many of them feel let down by God, and they've chosen to say there is no God because, in a sense, God let them down. A lot of injured atheists are often former religious people in different ways, like cult people who belong to a cult. People that come out of cults often will become atheists because their entire belief system was formulated around a religious system. But although the religious system was skewed or different, but because it was so bad, many of them will just go straight to atheism, as opposed to, I was just taught poorly, or I didn't research it enough. And I think part of it's pride, honestly. I think many people that were misled in a cult that say there is no God, if I'm being transparent with you, I would say many of them don't want to own the idea that they had been misled. It's easier to just say, well, there's just no God to begin with. And so that's a problem. Now, I will also give you one other one, and that is legalistic Christian belief systems will often cause atheists. That's a weird one. But here's the thing. I think Josh McDowell said this, and he said, rules without relationship breeds rebellion. Rules without relationship breeds rebellion. And so what happens is, in a legalistic system where it's a bunch of rules, you've got to check these boxes. Now, is it okay to have some rules for God? Does he have a standard? Absolutely he does. There's a certain amount of that that's really healthy and important and good. But when there's rules without relationship, that's really what becomes the legalistic side, where you just need to do this. It doesn't matter how you feel. It doesn't matter what you think. You just do these things over and over and over. That creates rebellion. Everybody with me? So legalism often will cause people to go the atheistic route and just go, I just don't believe any of it anymore. I've never believed it. There must be no God. So these people that are injured often are fearful of church. They don't really want to be invited. You can invite them, but they'll be wary of it and scared of it, and won't believe that it's genuine. If they've had a bad experience, many of them will say all experiences are going to be the same. They're all bad. Now, this is where my Brussels sprout analogy comes in. For some of you haven't heard that. But here it is. Brussels sprouts are a terrible way to judge vegetables. Now, in my opinion, Brussels sprouts are the most evil vegetable that has ever been mutated. I refuse to believe that a Brussels sprout was created. It is a mutation of a cabbage. That's the scientific me that says that. And the theological side of me, anything that's that slimy and nasty must be evil. You should not eat them. And now, for those of you that disagree with me, you're wrong. And so I'm just kidding. You can put enough cream and bacon on anything and make it taste good. I'm convinced that with enough cream and bacon, my shoes would taste just fine. That doesn't mean I should eat my shoes, nor should you eat Brussels sprouts. Everybody with me on that? Now, okay. So here's the idea. So if a Brussels sprout had been the first vegetable that I ever ate, what assumptions might I make about all vegetables? I might assume that they're all equally as evil. The truth is, corn and green beans are awesome. Brussels sprouts are evil. So, here's the deal. The reality is a lot of injured atheists, they've had Brussels sprout church experiences. They've had Brussels sprout Christian experiences. They've had Brussels sprout pastor experiences. That does not mean all churches, all Christians, and all pastors are Brussels sprouts. I prefer to think of myself as corn. A little crunchy on the outside, nice and sweet on the inside, that kind of thing. And so, but it's true. Think about it. The analogy stands. Just because you've had a bad experience with one thing doesn't mean all things are bad. And so a lot of people have had just Brussels sprout experiences. And they're injured, they're hurting over it. And by the way, that little Brussels sprout analogy, I've probably told that no less than 500 times on airplanes or in taxis or in hotels over the last 15 years or so. It's a good story to tell because people will get it. I remember having that conversation with an angry atheist on an airplane many, many years ago. And she was sitting in the middle seat. That's probably why she was angry. And so and I'm on the aisle, and we're just talking and had entered in. This was before my formal ministry days. I was a business guy. And we just kept talking, and somehow we got into a religious topic because that was always my goal, was to take it there. And so we're on that topic, and she instantly becomes angry and defensive. And I asked her, why are you, when the idea of God comes up, why are you angry? That's a good question, though. Why are you angry? What is it about it that makes you emotionally upset? And she went on to, really what she was an injured atheist that was angry. And she went on and on about growing up in a false religious system. If I remember correctly, she grew up in a Russian Orthodox church that was so Orthodox, the services were in Russian, and she did not speak Russian. And so the first 18 years of her life, she went to church never understanding a word they said. That was part of the problem. And so, she had this system of belief and was angry about it. And I told her the Brussels sprout story, but I left off the conclusion. And I just said, I hate Brussels sprouts. And that's how the conversation entered. I entered into the conversation that way. And she laughed, and I gave her the same little spiel I gave you. And I said, now, if a Brussels sprout would be the first vegetable I ever ate, what would I assume about all vegetables? And she said, I get it. And I said, well, what do you think about it? Do you think it's true? Are all churches bad because you had that bad church experience? And she said, it's possible that they're not. Okay, good. We made some ground up on that one flight, right? So I don't know what happened to her, but tonight I'll be praying for her. I haven't thought about her in years, but I remember the Russian Orthodox church thing. And who knows? Maybe it was just enough to break a little wall down, a little barrier down. And so, the answer is with injured atheists, you got to be patient. You got to love these people. Inviting them to be a part of your life and see genuineness is really important. They will be scared to come to a church even like this one. You can overcome objections depending on why they were injured. Like if they were injured because they're full of tattoos and they've got gauges in their ears and they got kicked out at some church, some church down the road. They got there and the deacons who were out on the front porch smoking turned them away because they had tattoos. If that happened to them, they might assume all churches are evil. But really, they need to experience the reality of a church that says, we don't care whether you have tattoos or gauges in your ears. you're welcome here. Come on, come with me. I'll come pick you up. It may take a while to overcome that objection, but they might need to see it. But small groups, community group, Bible studies, things like that are often an easier entry point for them. But ultimately, to the injured atheist, you have to figure out, why are they injured? What injured them in the first place, and how do we overcome that? Well, I only got through 3. So let me wrap this up for you. Ultimately, if you're going to interact, and the ones I was going to talk about were a contrarian atheist, which basically is the devil's advocate atheist. Anyone ever met those guys where it's just like every time you say something, they go, yeah, but this. And they disagree with everything. Like, these are the people that would argue with you that water is wet. It's just a contrarian spirit. And so there's atheists that are that way. Anything you bring up, they will oppose it. And then you have the worldly wise atheist who's decided that they're atheists because their favorite TV actor is an atheist. And it is the most lame one ever, but you will run into these people that will go, there's so many smart people in the world that are atheists, and so that's why I'm an atheist. It's like, what you want to say is, do you think for yourself? You want to say that, but that doesn't help anything, but they'll do that. And then they'll usually say something really stupid like, well, Thomas Jefferson, he was an atheist, and he was super smart, so that's why we have a problem there. Thomas Jefferson was not an atheist. But that's a history lesson, so we can pull that through, we can work through that. And then there's 5 other ones, and I'll talk about these next week. Ultimately, here's the deal, guys. You've got to ask good questions. You've got to ask questions of, why do you think this way? I want to know. And usually that's been very successful for me, is saying, look, I really want to know why you think what you think. Would you tell me? Tell me your story. Why are you an atheist? Why are you angry at God? Why have you decided that there's no God? Is there anything I could say to you that would change your mind? Is there anything anyone would say to you or could say to you that would at least make you contemplate it or think about it? Why? Why? Help me understand. I don't understand. I've always believed in God. Help me understand what it would look like to not believe. I don't understand. Explain it to me. Bathe it in prayer so that the devil doesn't capture your heart. But let me tell you, if you get in that position and you start to ask questions, come see me and we'll talk, because we've just scratched the surface. But honestly, guys, a lot of atheists, they want to hear, they want to know that you're willing to hear their story, and inviting them to tell them why, and then be ready to give a defense for the hope that's in you. 1 Peter 3:15 does not say, give a reason for the scientific explanations and philosophical ramblings that you have in you. It's, why do you have hope? And so here's the deal. You don't have to be a scientist to have hope. You don't have to have a seminary degree to have hope. But I do think as you leave here, what I would encourage you to do is ask the question, what is the hope that I have? And how would I answer it if someone said, you're really different in a good way? Why? How would you answer it? I really think it's something that our Christian communities need to practice and get more comfortable with, because if you start to live a Christian life out loud and people see it, people will ask you, why are you different? And then what will you say? And then if they say, well, I don't believe any of that. I don't believe that there's any God at all. Then say, okay, why? Tell me why. Why do you believe that? Have you always believed that? If not, what changed? What was the one thing that made you go from believing to not believing? Just tell me the story. I want to hear it. And oftentimes, just being able to tell a story is very healing and opens the door. But especially if you can ask them, what would you need to hear that would change your mind? You may not have that answer immediately, but it's fair to set up a second conversation and go, I want to chew on that. I don't know how to answer. Is it okay to say to someone I don't know? If they were to say, well, if you could explain to me why God would do blah, 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 would it be fair to say, I don't know the answer to that question, but can we get together next Tuesday again for coffee and I'll work on it? I think it's intellectually honest, and it's better to do that than to fumble through it and not have any idea what you're saying. I think it's okay to say, I don't know. Let's talk about it next week, or let's talk about it tomorrow. I'll find out. I've got people I can ask. Let me go work on it. I don't know. And then work on it. And let's work on it and give them those answers. But truly, last thing I'll say, faith does not always have evidence behind it. Nor does everyone that's an atheist need evidence. Everyone's different. Part of what it goes into a good diagnostician, diagnosing what's wrong, is just asking questions. Just tell me, what is it? What would you need to hear? What's changed? And help them work through it. Because honestly, a lot of atheists I've met in my lifetime, they don't know why they're atheists. They can't give you a good answer. A lot of them can, but a lot of them have no idea. I don't know. I just don't believe. Great. Well, do you want to? That's the last question I guess I should give you tonight. And we'll talk about it again next week. Do you want to believe? This is an important question for an atheist. Do you want to? Jennifer, my wife, she has a sister that's a couple years older than her, and Wendy has been an atheist since she was a teenager. And every few years, Jennifer and I have been married 21 years, so every few years, Wendy and I go round and around and around about it. And I would always give her evidence, and it was always through email. She never wanted to talk on the phone. And we'd go back and forth and back and forth. It was always philosophy and science, and I'd get her on the ropes, and she'd be done. She would just quit. Like, I don't want to talk about it anymore. It was always that way. You know, when we get down, I'd get her to a point where I knew she couldn't answer the question, and she'd go, I'm done, I don't want to talk about it. And it'd be 2 years later before we'd ever could have a conversation. And several years ago, I had an aha moment, and I realized I don't think she wants to believe. And so my final question for her was, Wendy, do you want there to be a God? And she said, no, I don't want there to be. You have to approach that person very different than someone who says, I don't believe because I'm angry, or I don't believe because I've been hurt, or I don't believe because of science. For someone to say, I don't want to believe because I don't want there to be God, is a totally different thing. We'll talk about it more next time. Okay? I love you. Thanks for being here tonight. Have a good evening. Guys, we're going to start up our men's study down here in about 25 minutes. We'd love for you to stay. Have a good night. See you next week.